Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please let us know. But I will give the mic now to Bobby to handle if there is any questions. Thank you so much.
Questions, anyone? Just checking this. Thank you, Johanna. So we're moving on to the last session, but it's not the last session. That probably, for me, it's one of the most important sessions for the region, addressing the regional requirements. Today we saw a lot of presentations on technology, advancements, and all the challenges that we face post-COVID and pre-COVID. And we also looked at several systems that would help us to sail through this. And the foundation of all these systems have to be strong food regulatory environment. How do you get this? And how do regulators across the world come together and put policies? How do we get to know each other? And I do not know anybody else who is better than Professor Samuel Godfrey, who's kind of instrumental in getting policymakers together. And he's been doing this for several years. And is a good friend of ours and has been a good friend of our conference too for several years, I think from 2007, if my memory is correct. That's a long way. And today he's coming all the way from Canada to join us again for the 15th annual event. There's a lot of information about him on Hoover, but I'll take the most important ones and present it here. Professor Godfrey was the former Director General of Health Canada's Food Directorate, and he was a former Vice Chair of the Codex Alimentaris Commission, and currently he's the President of the Food Regulatory Science Society and a full professor at the University of Laval in Quebec. He has a PhD in analytical chemistry and has close to 30 years of experience in food regulatory policies and risk analysis. His work in regulatory environment is really recognized globally, and also particularly in the Arab region, and his exceptional skills in handling multiple languages really makes him the most sought after person when it comes to engagement and training activities too. And he will be talking about enhancing food safety through Codex standards in the Arab region. There is a small change in the title, which is online. Just make sure that that's corrected here. It's enhancing food safety through Codex standards in Arab region. Over to you, Professor Godfrey.
Thank you very much, Bobby, for your generous introduction. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, it's a true privilege for me to be here today and to contribute to this event, to the 15th session of the Dubai International Food Safety Conference. We're also very privileged to have had the collaboration and the support of the Dubai municipality to contribute to the program, and particularly to co-organize the first global food regulatory science symposium that is happening, in fact, concomitantly with the Dubai Food Safety Conference. So as Bobby indicated, I will be speaking about the use or the reliance on Codex standards and the importance of international standards to support the development of robust food regulatory systems and definitely to support food safety. Now, I don't need to make a demonstration here because I'm sure that I'm preaching to the converted. Food safety is an encompassing discipline, and it is at the intersect of so many policy agendas. At least three are to be acknowledged: the agriculture agenda, the trade agenda, and the health agenda. I'm sure that now that we have been celebrating the second World Food Safety Day, that you have all encompassed this particular slogan: if it's not safe, it is not food. So essentially, it's an important component. And I don't believe that we need to make the case for the importance of international standards, but let us go through some of the levers that make these standards important and paramount even. First of all, the fact that we will need more food because we will need to have, of course, safe food to feed over 9.5 billion people by 2050. And again, food safety is a condition to food security. Food, the agri-food sector, continues to represent an important economic sector for many countries around the world. And in fact, food is one of the most traded commodity internationally. Over $2 trillion worth of food are traded internationally on a yearly basis. And despite some of the hiccups that we have witnessed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which essentially may have impacted the supply chains, food production continues to be a globalized business. And again, I use this example of this loaf of bread, which is essentially an international citizen, if you will. You will see various ingredients that compose a simple product, as simple as a loaf of bread, and you'll see that these ingredients are sourced from various parts of the world. And if we look at consumers' expectations all around the world continue to be centered to having access to safe, nutritious, and high-quality food products. And regardless of the economic development status of countries, all consumers are allowed and are entitled, in fact, to have access to safe and quality products. And this, of course, has led a number of governments and competent authorities to work towards increasing their level of oversight on food products and ensuring that products that are available in their jurisdiction, whether be it domestically produced or imported, are essentially subjected to the same type of standards. Now, all this makes the case for international standards because, again, if we are trading food commodities, not having the same criteria around which we define what is safe and what is also of quality, we create hurdles to trade. And this is essentially what has pushed the two parent organizations of Codex, two international organizations that are the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Health Organization, to develop what was known as, what is still in fact known as the joint FAO-WHO Food Standards Program, which is made out of 3 pillars, one of which is a standard setting pillar. This standard setting pillar was actually further structured through the creation over 6 decades ago. In fact, next year we will be celebrating the 60th anniversary of Codex. So in 1963, an intergovernmental body was established under the name of Codex. Now, why Codex? Codex is essentially the Latin word for code. So essentially what Codex Alimentarius is, it is the food code. It is the international food code. Codex has grown in that most of the countries of the world are now members of this organization. It consists of 189 members, so 188 countries, and 1 member organization that is the European Union. In Codex, there is also a recognition that the development of standards can not only involve competent authorities, but needs to involve all various partners and stakeholders, consumer organizations, health professional organizations, and more importantly, those who produce food, so food industry representatives. And that's why when you look at the composition of the Commission, you see that Codex has even more observers than members. 239 observers were identified as of late, and in fact their numbers continue to increase because essentially more organizations continue to apply to have that status within Codex. Now, what does Codex do? What does this body do? Mostly develop standards. Develop standards with a dual mandate. Primary mandate is to protect consumers and primarily to protect consumers' health. But there is also a second mandate that is equally important, and that is to ensure fair practices in the food trade. So essentially to also protect consumers' economic well-being, but also to make sure that there is a level playing field between nations that trade food commodities. And it is the body that coordinates all food standards at the international level. Now, I'm sure that for those of you who are familiar with Codex, this is a repeat, but just actually to have a very quick reminder of the way Codex conducts its business. It relies on a commission that makes the final decision, and that essentially contains all these members and observers. But it relies essentially on subsidiary bodies, mainly committees, technical committees, known as horizontal committees for those that look after specific subject matters, for example, contaminants in food or labeling of food products. Other technical committees that look at commodity-specific standards, and this is what we see, for example, with the Committee on Fats and Oils, but also time-limited ad hoc intergovernmental task forces. And we owe to these task forces a lot of the guidance that we have received over the years. One of the last ones that completed its work is, in fact, the Task Force on Antimicrobial Resistance that provided the world with guidance on assessing and managing the risks associated with antimicrobial resistance. We have also a coordination at the regional level in the form of FAO/WHO regional coordinating committees that also are part of the structure of Codex. We also owe to Codex the fact that the deliberations on food safety and nutrition standard is science-driven, and that's why Codex relies on a number of expert groups that, in fact, recruit amongst the best and the highest caliber scientists from around the world. And these expert bodies, such as the Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives, for example, provide the risk assessment on the basis of which decisions about food standards are made. This is, in fact, also an emphasis on the fact that international standards are science-driven standards when it comes to food safety and nutrition. The importance of these international standards were further emphasized after the creation of the World Trade Organization. And Codex standards are mentioned in at least two of the key agreements of the World Trade Organization. The Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement identifies Codex standards and guidelines as an international benchmark. And in fact, there is a call on members of the World Trade Organization to participate in the work of Codex as one of the international standard-setting bodies. Now let's examine the situation of Codex in our region, the Arab region. A number of countries of the Arab region are, in fact, founding members of the Codex Alimentaris Commission. But let us say that there is a lot to improve, and we have, in fact, some work ahead of us in order to increase the contribution of the region, but also the impacts of Codex standards on strengthening the food safety regulatory system in the region. This is actually a little study that was conducted to look at the level of participation of countries from the Arab region in Codex meetings throughout the years. And what you see, I know that it's very difficult to read, in blue are essentially the participation of Arab countries. Now we know that Arab countries are above the single digit, but you see that most of the participation over the past period did not exceed the single-digit participation in terms of number of countries that were present or effectively contributed in the work of technical Codex committees. Now, most recently, we have witnessed an improvement from a number of countries, and particularly through virtual attendance to meetings. So at least there was one positive impact to the COVID-19 pandemic. It enabled a number of countries and delegations to be more present and to participate in Codex proceedings. So there are, in fact, some impediments that the region witnesses and faces that essentially impede the participation in Codex proceedings. Some lack of technical capacity, also lack of awareness, perhaps, also the possibility of having really linkages between the national food regulatory system with international standards. And that's why we are working right now to develop capacity building programs and initiatives in order to alleviate some of these challenges. This is essentially what we have set to ourselves to do in collaboration with a number of partners in the Arab region. We are working on the implementation since March of this year of what we call now the Arab Codex Initiative. This is a capacity building program implemented by the Global Food Regulatory Science Society and Laval University and funded by the US Codex office in the US Department of Agriculture. Now, perhaps you will indulge me for a few minutes of advertisement about the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. This is a not-for-profit organization that was incorporated under Canadian laws with the aim to promote the generation and the dissemination of knowledge and competencies in what we call food regulatory science. Now, we have defined these sciences as all scientific disciplines that underpin regulatory decisions, and of course with a stronger emphasis on risk analysis. There is actually a linkage between GFoRSS and Dubai, because the idea of GFoRSS was in fact born in Dubai at one of these meetings, at the Dubai International Food Safety Conference of 2019, where a number of scientists and regulators met and actually decided that there wasn't a home for these disciplines that we call food regulatory science. And in fact, in November of 2019, we agreed on the creation of this organization, and we completed such creation in 2020. The mission is to promote these disciplines through the development of networks, knowledge generation, knowledge dissemination, and fostering collaboration. We are, of course, putting a big emphasis and a strong interest in supporting the development of Codex communities of practice, because again, the process that leads to the development of international food standards is practically the embodiment of, or the materialization of food regulatory science in action. And I would like also to invite colleagues who are interested to join this organization to apply to join. Membership is free, and in fact, we are really trying to create a network of scientists that contribute in this area. Now, specifically for this Arab Codex initiative, what are we aiming for? We are aiming to strengthen regional coordination and a stronger participation, and particularly an effective participation in Codex technical committees. So essentially the work where food standards are born, are developed, making sure that issues that are relevant to the region are brought up. Also moving from potentially a consumer of Codex standards to contributors to Codex standards and advancing the interests of the region such that they are part of the considerations that form the foundation of developing the decisions at the international level. We're also looking at creating communities of practice of scientists, contributors that can support regulators in preparing for their participation in Codex proceedings. And there is also an emphasis on some national investments. We know that one of the reasons why a number of competent authorities do not participate or are not able to participate in some of the international food standard setting discussions, or essentially also to use these the outcomes of international food standards development, is a lack of capacity. And we are discussing right now with a number of countries to strengthen the national Codex capacity through their national Codex contact points. So these are some of the areas where we are aiming to contribute. So obviously, the element of participation, and more than presence, effective participation in the technical preparation of food of international food standards is a key element in that regard. And we, in fact, held a meeting 2 months ago in Dubai, where we gathered several representatives of Codex contact point in the Arab region. And in fact, our colleagues prioritized the committees of interest to the region. These are, in fact, or this is the result of that prioritization. The Codex Committee on Contaminants in Food, the Codex Committee on Food Additives, Pesticide Residues, Veterinary Drug Residues, as well as the inspection of import-export, but also the food hygiene were identified as key priorities. There was also a discussion that some commodity committees were very important to the region, either because of the production of the region of these commodities or even the high consumption. So essentially, spices and culinary herbs, and the committee of interest was identified as a priority. Fish and fish products, as well as fats and oils, also are part of the priorities that our colleagues identified. The other element that was identified as a result of the discussions of our last meeting is that one of the challenges and impediments to contribute to Codex standards is, in a lot of instances, the lack of data, the lack of availability of data that will contribute or that help, in fact, competent authorities to prepare their positions. If a standard on a contaminant in food is being prepared and a country does not have the data that they need in order to study the impact of that standard on their own industry, the feasibility, the achievability of that standard, that can become a major impediment to have a position about that standard. So the investment on the data is actually a key element, and we have identified some goals for us to contribute to data availability and to data generation that will support Codex delegations from the region to better be prepared for the discussions that are upcoming. In fact, the upcoming Codex Committee on Contaminants in Food will develop or will continue its discussions on the development of mycotoxin standards. Discussions about lead as well in a number of food commodities will continue. And as a result, the region needs to have some occurrence data on these contaminants, and that's what we will be investing to support, generate. And sometimes actually it's not a question of generating. Data may be available, may be published, but it's not accessible to regulators to use and essentially to particularly assess. We have identified also an important foundational aspect for risk assessment that the region needs, and that's the investment in food consumption data. You cannot conduct a risk assessment unless you rely on consumption data that are related to your own environment, to the food basket that is consumed by your population. And in fact, this is going to be a topic of discussion at the upcoming session of the Symposium on Food Regulatory Science. There is a session on Saturday, the 20th, that will be dedicated to methodological development around consumption data. We also identified, and this was a recommendation that came from colleagues from the region, that we work more on the use of Codex standards. Recently, the Codex Committee on Residues of Veterinary Drugs in Food developed a guideline on extrapolation of what we call maximum residue levels from one species to another. And the region consumes, for example, a number of animal tissues that are not covered by Codex MRLs, for example, camelide tissues. And the idea here is to use the guideline developed by Codex in order to derive these MRLs for the regions for tissues of interest. So some work is being actually planned for us for the upcoming period. We also identified the need to anchor our work in Codex in the region with a strong collaboration of regional organizations. And we are very fortunate to enjoy right now the collaboration with two key organizations working in the area of standards. The GCC Standardization Organization, as well as the Arab Industrial Development, Standardization and Mining Organizations, have both actually been in discussion with us over the past period. And we are working essentially to structure and hopefully institutionalize the collaboration of the Arab Codex initiative within these organizations, given that, in fact, both organizations enjoy the status of Codex observer, and both organizations are very much in touch with the key competent authorities working in the area of food standardization. So we are working, in fact, on strengthening that collaboration, and hopefully this will lead even to structured agreements between the Global Food Regulatory Science Society and those two organizations. I mentioned the investment in national Codex capacities, and we have been working, and I can mention Codex Egypt. Our colleagues in the Codex contact point in Egypt have been working with us to develop a collaborative program, out of which, in fact, not only will we contribute to strengthening the capacity in Egypt, but there are a number of resources that could be useful to many Arab countries, to many countries in the region to strengthen their national capacities. Now, of course, these investments will not bear fruit unless they are sustainable. And there are three ingredients to sustainability that we need to look for. I mentioned the issue of data, and we will contribute. This is very much in the mandate of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, and particularly within this initiative, we will attempt to have our contribution in the availability of data that support food regulatory decision-making. Availability of tools, when I say tools, it's those databases, anything that will allow particularly to handle the data and to support the decision-making. Including tools of communication. I mean, right now, the communication between Codex contact points in the region happen through emails. If we can create another system that is more seamless using an electronic solution, this will be a very simple area of progress that we can achieve. But most importantly, we will not have sustainability unless we build competencies, and unless we build competencies in the region. And that's why there will be a strong emphasis on training of competencies in risk analysis, but training also of competencies that support the area of standard formulation. In fact, we have built our action in this Codex initiative in a longer-term view, with a longer-term vision. So essentially with areas related to capacity building and training, areas related to competency development and risk analysis, risk assessment training will be part of those. Areas related to strengthening coordination, exchange of information between Codex contact points, supporting also the coordinating structure within the FAO-WHO Near East Coordinating Committee, but also using the functions of both the GSO as well as ETSMO in this regard. And we are hoping to lead to what we call a data and intelligence hub, so essentially create a public goods in the form of these data that we will collect and we will make available to regulators, but to all food stakeholders to use. In fact, here, I'm going to formulate a dream, which is hopefully actually not so distant, long dream to achieve, is building a center of excellence in food regulatory science that could be based in the region and that can support various competent authorities by pooling resources in various areas that support food safety standards development and that can actually offer that help to competent authorities not only to contribute to international food safety standards, but also to strengthen the food control systems nationally. I guess, I'm going to use the same hope that we had when we discussed in 2019 the creation of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. That was an idea that was bounced around in 2019, and it became reality, and we are now contributing and investing to sustain that effort. Perhaps, again, this is another idea, potentially born in Dubai, and that will hopefully find its implementation in the coming months or years. What we are hoping to achieve collectively is the same objective, is to continue to contribute to enhance consumer protection, to create a fair environment for food trade, and also this fair environment will be an enabling environment to invest in food production, so essentially making the investment in food and agri-food businesses something that will stimulate the economies of the region. And of course, this will also equip the region to be better prepared to address a number of challenges, whether be it in relation with the Sustainable Development Goals or also emerging issues. Again, very thankful to the collaboration of the Dubai municipality and the organizers of this event to enable us to be with you and to exchange with the community of scientists and regulators. And thank you again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Godfrey. Do we have questions from the audience? We have a very shy audience usually. Questions? If you have questions, we still have a lot of time with him. We've got 3 days of program from the 20th to the 23rd, 22nd for the Food Regulatory Forum, and that's broadcasted live through the HUA platform. If you wish to attend the meeting live, you can just come to us at the registration desk and let us know if you want to attend the workshops live in the hotel at Le Méridien Airport Hotel. So just to reconfirm, we saw the programs here, and the whole idea of this presentation was to get the involvement from the audience. Thank you so much, Mr. Godfrey, for this, and we hope that our partnership continues, and what we started with the conference continues to be a legacy, and also change the policies or help us change the policies around this region and also across the world. And and I think it's a very admirable model. Thank you so much, personally and from our organization. So we're getting to the last bit, and it's time to thank you all for coming all the way to Expo 2020, to the Dubai Exhibition Center. We do not have the next session live here, so it is broadcasted only online. We got a session that is starting at 4, which is on